if we don't finish today's lesson, that's fine. I wanted to try to get to the point where, because Jacob, today we're covering Jacob wanting to go back home, but there's a lot of, if we know Laban's character now, how would we describe Laban if we were to choose a particular word? And we want to use polite words if we can. So, because we know Laban is right. I mean, Jacob kind of was a swindler, wasn't he? I mean, that's how he ended up living with Laban, because he swindled his brother, or basically took advantage of his brother when he was famished and got, well, give me your birthright, and then he got the blessing from his dad, and then his mom says, well, you better get out of Dodge because your brother's pretty mad. So that's what happens. And then so we find out that Jacob is working quite a bit for, I'm trying to remember, his uncle, except not everything is super kosher, as we find out. So what was the first clue that everything may not be kosher, or that he maybe is more of a swindler than Jacob is? So, well, your daughter's really pretty, and I want to kind of marry within the clan, etc., and I would like to marry her. Sure, you can, but work 7 years. Yeah. So on the wedding night, of course, it's dark and all covered, which would make me think that Leah and Rachel are at least, size-wise, probably about the same size, same height. But she's all covered up, and whoop! Oh, surprise! I can't marry my younger daughter before the older one is married. That's just how it is, right? So, well, why didn't you say that before, right? So, yeah, so that's kind of the, and so one thing after another, we just kind of see that Jacob is, Laban is quite the swindler, isn't he? So now we're starting partway through or toward the end of chapter 30, okay, and we covered kind of what's married life with Jacob and Leah and Rachel. Of course, it's not that good, because who does Jacob really love, or whom does Jacob really love? Rachel. Of course, he married Leah first, right? 2 weeks, and then 2 weeks later, Laban said, okay, you can marry Rachel, but you have to still work 7 more years, okay? So Leah's always wanting Jacob's love, and in a sense not getting it. But Rachel is jealous because Leah is more fertile, able to bear sons. And so there's this whole crazy battle of the babies that goes on, etc., etc., etc. So all of this is now done. Years have passed, and Jacob now says, hey, I think I would like to return home. Okay? And that's where we find ourselves. Chapter 30, verse 25. Okay? So we'll read the first 3 verses. As soon as Rachel had borne Joseph, okay, so Joseph is like, okay, he'll play an important role later. Jacob said to Laban, send me away that I may go to my own home and country. Give me my wives and my children for whom I have served you, that I may go, for you know that the service that I have given you. But Laban said to him, if I have found favor in your sight, I have learned by divination that the Lord has blessed me because of you. Name your wages, and I will give it. So, what did Jacob ask? Yeah, he said, hey, let me go, and let me take my wives, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Does he ask anything about wages? No. So what is Laban actually doing? Yeah, he's saying, I want you to work for me more. Just tell me whatever you want. See? Now, it's true that Laban realizes that Jacob has been wonderful to his bottom line, that is his income. He's now wealthy because of Jacob. Okay? But how did he say that he knew? He didn't just go by looking at his flocks, by looking at his bank account, or whatever you use to say how well are you doing. He said he learned by divination. Okay? And Scripture talks about divination, and that's trying to learn God's will or predict the future through through wrongful practices. Okay? So it's kind of an insult because, in other words, he's saying, oh, I know that I've been successful, but I had to learn this by divination, not because it's obvious to everyone that I'm way better off than I was before you arrived. So that's a backhanded compliment, right? And it's also, no, I have. It's also kind of an insult to Yahweh, Jacob's God. Okay? So he wants to go, but Laban basically says, name your wage and I'll give it to you. In other words, please, I'm not sending you off. I'm not giving you permission to go. He could just leave. But it seems as if that the one person who was once a swindler isn't so much a swindler anymore. And he wants to do things the right way, at least, because he doesn't just leave. Well, we'll find that out. But something else does happen, which is quite interesting. Okay? So Laban's up to his old tricks. Okay? Let's continue on. Let's see what happens. 29 through 33. Okay. Jacob said to him, you yourself know how I have served you and how your livestock has fared with me. In other words, what's this divination crap? You could just look out there and see, right? So Jacob's a bit incensed. Oh, and earlier, never mind. I'll just say that he used the word served three times, two verbs and one a noun. So, no, that'll be later on. So hang tight. Okay. Name your wages and I will give it. Jacob said to him, you yourself know how I have served you and your livestock has fared with me. For you had little before I came, and it had increased abundantly, and the Lord has blessed you wherever I turned. But now, when shall I provide for my own household also? So it's like you're skirting the whole issue. You're playing dumb, and you know that life is much better after I came and started doing all the work that you asked me to do. Right? And this is the Lord, that's God's hand working through me to bless you. You don't need phony divination to know this. And so this is all part of the game of manipulation, right? So, yeah, so Jacob kind of calls him on this, right? He says, hey, I don't want to, I'm not going to go for this. Okay? So let's see what continues, okay? Now what I just, okay, right. 31. Thank you. So, yeah, I finished kind of late. I kind of finished late at night. So, too late, only if you are asleep. Okay, so all of this stuff, he's saying, hey, this is nonsense, okay? So verse 31, okay, if I can find it. He said, what shall I give you? So, in other words, he's still pressing on. What shall I give you? So Jacob's either going to leave in a huff, or he's going to go, okay, I'll go along with this one more time. Let's see. Jacob said, you shall not give me anything. Okay, is he just going to leave? If you will do this for me, I will again pasture your flock and keep it. So Jacob now is saying, okay, you want me to work for you, I'll work for you, but here are my conditions. But listen to these conditions. Okay? Let me pass through your flock today, removing from it every speckled and spotted sheep and every black lamb, and the spotted and the speckle among the goats, and they shall be my wages. So my honesty will answer for me later, when you come to look into my wages with you. Every one that is not speckled and spotted among the goats and black among the lambs, if found with me, shall be counted stolen. Okay? So what is Jacob asking to be his wages? Livestock, but weird ones, right? Because think about this. You're going like, wait a minute. I mean, such animals do exist, but they're not the majority. They're kind of in the minority. They're kind of recessive traits, if you wanted to use that expression from Mendelian genetics, right? So he said, give me what kind of sheep? Speckled and spotted sheep. Well, most of the sheep that I see, they're kind of white, maybe if not completely white, they may be off color, but they're usually one color, creamy or white or... Colored wool isn't as valuable. Well, yes. And of course for the sacrifices, right, an unspotted lamb, which means that if it's an unspotted lamb, there are spotted ones. But they're not that common. So he's asking for the animals that are not favored, the animals with the less desirable traits. Okay? And then, of course, lambs, every black lamb and spotted and speckled. So even goats that are kind of variegated or are, varied in kind of their coat are also the ones that he's saying, let this be part of my herd and part of my flock. Okay? So he's actually, this is a pretty good deal. He's not saying, hey, I've worked for you all these years, and you're wealthy because of what I've done, so I'm going to go back home. How about if I take half the flock? Because, the flock is multiple times bigger than what it was before. So I don't think that would be completely out. What, you mean half? Well, what was the size before I arrived? All right, sure, right? Like, you can kind of shame him into it or something. But that's not what he asked. He's saying, give me give me the sheep and goats that are less favored, and that'll be my wages. So he's giving him a really good deal. Okay? So let's see what happens. You go, okay, cool. But, we kind of know Laban's character now, don't we? Yeah. Okay. So we're going to look at verses 34 through 36 now. Laban said, good, let it be as you have said. But that day Laban removed the male goats that were striped and spotted, and all the female goats that were speckled and spotted, every one that had white on it, and every lamb that was black, and put them in charge of his sons. So there's going to be some weird-looking sheep and weird-looking goats, but they're not going to be able to breed because he's taking the sex of one and then the sex of the other, and he's sending them off with some of his sons a number of days away. Okay? So Laban's trying to swindle Jacob. So some lessons are here, folks. So we have some folks who are here visiting. So join on in. We're going through the book of Genesis, and right now we're talking about the relationship between Jacob and his uncle Laban. Okay. So it's so Laban has once again outswindled Jacob, but it seems as if Jacob is no longer kind of that character. Okay, so it just seems that you're thinking he asked for a really good. You wanted him to work, and he said, okay. So you agreed, but now you made it almost impossible for him to kind of have a flock. So not only are you swindling Jacob, what are you helping to ensure? I mean, if you're well off because of his work, you are forcing him to stay there longer and work, because how long will it now take him to have a flock when he's kind of taken the males of the one, either the goats or the lambs, I don't remember which, and then the females of the other? It's going to be rough. Okay? So this is like a super swindle. Not good at all. Okay? So there you have it. Okay? So what is Jacob going to do? Is he finally going to say, I've had enough? Does he beat up his father-in-law? Does he just leave? Or does he continue working? What has happened in the past? Yeah, Laban has always gotten his way. And so he's done this and he's done that, and Jacob has always kind of gone along. Okay? So it makes you wonder how much of a swindler he was on his own, right? Because when he first swindled Esau, what was going on? Well, it was his mom, right? And it would have happened anyway, the blessing and the birthright, because God had said so. But it would have happened in a different way, okay? So it is not good. Let's continue on and see what happens with these guys. I mean, it's almost like you can't even make this stuff up. I mean, it's like, what? I mean, he's your son-in-law. It'd be different if you were stealing from a brigand or something, but, okay. So 37 through 43, okay? Then Jacob took fresh sticks of poplar and almond and plane trees and peeled white streaks in them, exposing the white of the stick. So you could kind of see he's peeling back some of the bark, and he's exposing the wood inside, but also there's some of the bark that's still on the branches, okay? He set the sticks that he had peeled in front of the flocks in the troughs, that is, the watering places where the flocks came to drink. And since they bred when they came to drink, the flocks bred in front of the sticks, and so the flocks brought forth striped, speckled, and spotted. Like, what? Okay. And Jacob, well, we'll get into that, because you're like, what? Okay. And Jacob separated the lambs and set the faces of the flocks toward the striped and all the black in the flock of Laban. He put his own droves apart and did not put them with Laban's flock, so his sheep. He's separating. He's now starting to get his own animals, and he's separating them from Laban's. So, in other words, time is passing because you're breeding animals, and they're having younger animals, so on and so forth, and of course they're going to breed. So he's building up a flock. Whenever the stronger of the flock were breeding, Jacob would lay the sticks in the troughs before the eyes of the flock, that they might breed among the sticks. But for the feebler of the flock, he would not lay them there. So the feebler would be Laban's, and the stronger Jacob's. So what is Laban doing? What does this tell us that Laban is doing? Nothing. Jacob's doing all the breeding for his flocks and Laban's flocks, and Laban just thinks, oh, well, I'm going to be better off because, he's going to get all the weird-looking ones, and I made it really hard for him to have, to kind of have a flock of kind of these spotted, weird-looking animals. So, and if he does see something, what is he going to see? He's going to see these sticks and like, what is Jacob doing with these sticks, and what? It's just going to look weird. He's not going to, I don't know what he's doing, but as long as I'm having lots of animals, I don't care. Okay? So he's kind of disconnected, and all this is going on. Okay? Thus the man increased greatly and had large flocks, female servants and male servants, and camels and donkeys. So some time passes, and now Jacob is wealthy because finally, at last, he's allowed to have his own animals. And Laban thought, well, I will swindle Jacob, and he'll be working for me forever in some type of indentured servitude. But it looks like Jacob has now outswindled the swindler. Or has he? But this is just so odd, because have you ever heard of such breeding techniques? Now, granted, I don't have a degree in animal husbandry, so I could tell you what could be going on, okay, what we know of concerning genetics and biology, but then we'll go on to the next chapter, because there may be another explanation as well. So, bottom of page 2, okay. So, are you guys ever heard of the term epigenetics? So when we were going through school, we heard about Lamarck and Mendel, if we remember those guys. So Mendel was the guy who breeded peas, and then he got like pink ones, or red ones and white ones, and then he would get pink ones, but not very often. And then he realized that one trait was more dominant than the other, and hence the idea of dominant recessive traits. And then he goes, well, it doesn't matter whether the peas are growing in lots of fertilized soil or dry soil or loam or sand. The ratio stays the same on the flower color. Okay, so he said this is determined by what we would call genetics. It doesn't matter about the environment. Well, Lamarck he said, no, the environment can affect your offspring. Well, Mendel said, well, it doesn't look like with the peas. Well, now we find out they're both right, though Mendel is more right. So there's something called epigenetics, which is called gene expression. So in our DNA, we have a whole bunch of genes, and not all of them are being expressed or turned on, right? And so there could be environmental factors which may express certain genes at one time or another. So I have a personal example. So a number of years ago, I ended up getting this weird condition where I had skin, thicker skin on like my elbows and my hands and my knees and like my ankles. And I went to the doctor and he goes, so I don't know, I'll send you to a dermatologist. Dermatologist didn't know. So he finally figured out, he goes, oh, it's called acrokeratoderma, symmetrical acrokeratoderma. What? In other words, I have this excess growth of skin symmetrically on these parts of my body. It's quite rare. I think there's only like 20 people who have it in China. Oh, well, great. Well, China is such a large population that they would document it, right? Well, I know it's not that uncommon because the last time I went to go help take care of my mom and dad before my dad died, I was visiting with a friend who had it. Oh, like, what? Because so we're visiting and we're drinking at Starbucks or whatever, having coffee, and it's like, what's the deal with that? Oh, I don't know what's going on here. And so we laughed about it because, but that's epigenetics. Something caused certain genes to express and told my body to grow extra skin in places. That's epigenetics, okay? So it does happen, okay? So the thing is Jacob is he manipulating the gene expression of the sheep? Well, some think that's the case, and so that's here, and I put a question mark. So the change in gene expression. So it could be doing that and causing more animals to express a mottled or variegated coat color. Okay? I don't have an animal husband degree, but that's something that people have discussed. If I were to say this is only purely biological in origin, I would say that it's a ruse. That Jacob is doing this stuff, befuddling everybody that's looking, like, what's this guy doing? Well, what? So they're distracted by these sticks, while what is he doing? Well, he's isolating his flock and he's using selective breeding, standard techniques. But it's a sleight of hand. They're focused on this thing while he's what? Breeding the sheep, right? So he's breeding sheep to favor the different coat colors, but also to favor the strong ones. So he's culling the best of those to himself, and he's leaving the rest for Jacob. And over time, he ends up with a larger, more stronger flock, and Laban doesn't, because Laban is lazy. Just lets Jacob do everything. So that's what's going on if this is only biological in nature. But is it? We have to continue on with the next chapter. Okay, because you just read it. If we stopped at chapter 30, we were just like, what? Okay, but there's a lot of things in Scripture that make you go, what? And then what do we realize? Whose hand is in the thick of that? Yeah, right? Because if you hear the story of Moses crossing the Red Sea, and if God's hand's not in it, you'd go, what? Right? That's crazy talk. And yet, that's what happened. And we even to this day they've even found the debris from various chariots of different time periods in the Red Sea, and you're like, well, how did that happen? Well, it makes sense right? So there is archaeological evidence to support that. Chapter 31. Okay. Now Jacob heard that the sons of Laban were saying, okay, Jacob has taken all that was our father's, and from what was our father's he has gained all his wealth. Yeah, that's kind of true. Not exactly true, but kind of, right? But why does this happen? Because Laban's lazy, and he's, for all these years he's benefited from Jacob's work, and he's just letting him do his thing. And so now Jacob is saying, well, I have a flock of my own, and I'm going to make sure my flock is large, robust, and strong. Laban, well, so his sons are going like, hey. So they're noticing, But why isn't Dad noticing? Yeah, right? So, okay, let's continue on. Okay. And Jacob saw that Laban did not regard him with favor as before. That's not exactly what the Hebrew says. It says that Jacob looked at Laban and now sees him looking as if in a different way that he's never seen him look before, which is bad. But in other words, this is something different now. So this isn't the normal swindle face that Laban may have or this or that. He's seeing something in Laban that he hasn't seen before, which in this case would not be, I want to swindle you, ha ha ha. But this would be malice, maybe hatred. But Jacob sees this and he's like, oh, I've never seen your dad look like this. Whoa, man, we better get out of Dodge. So he's really, this is because I've never seen your dad like this before. So it's not just that he didn't look on him with favor. This is some new sort of thing that Jacob is sensing, and he hasn't before in all his years with Laban. Okay? So this is anxiety causing to him. Okay? So let's look at verse 3. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your kindred, and I will be with you. Well, he's been wanting to go home for a while, but now God says, do this, which means what? It'll happen, right? Because not only did God say to do it, but he said, I will be with you. Don't worry. I got your back. It'll work out well. Okay? So there we have it. So two things are happening. So most likely what will Jacob now do? Right? Yeah, he's going to leave. Okay? Let's continue on. Okay? Are we okay? So questions, thoughts? I'll tell you, I don't think anybody's, I don't want to say this because some of the things people have told me as pastor, but I would say rare is the family that is more messed up than these Old Testament families. Okay? Which lets you know that there must be grace. Wow. Okay, let's continue on. Okay? Verses 4 through 9. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah into the field where his flock was, and said to them, see that your father does not regard me with favor as he did before, but the God of my father has been with me. You know that I have served your father with all my strength, yet your father has cheated me and changed my wages 10 times. Now, knowing what we know of Laban, if he changed Jacob's wages 10 times, let's say one of them was a pay increase for some reason, or whatever it may have been, however that was measured. Ultimately, everything was done for Laban's benefit. Okay, because we know that's how he operates. That's what we've seen. 10 times? Wow. But God did not permit him to harm me. If the spotted shall be your wages, then all the flock bore spotted. And if he said, the striped shall be your wages, then all the flock bore striped. Now, notice he's not mentioning the whole thing with the sticks. He's just saying, he's saying this is God's doing. So, was the sticks a ruse, or was this also God's way of using things? Like he used a staff with Moses, or used the branch to purify the water that was bitter during their wilderness waterings, right? So at this very verse, we don't know. But let's continue on. Okay? Thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me. So he's saying, it may look like I ripped off your dad, and we do know that he was breeding and doing all the stuff that a breeder would want to do to have a good flock, right? But what else do we know? That all the sheep that came out this way weren't only the result of his selective breeding and his culling of the flock and isolation and everything else. God's hand was in this. God was blessing Jacob. And that's the reason why what we would look at and go, this is weird. How could this happen? Well, it's possible, but it's not probable, right? But in this case, it did happen. It's kind of like now we know the coronavirus, it is possible it could have come by nature, but when you look at all the genetic variations and the whole cluster of things that happened, but not probable. And now everybody basically says, well, yeah, it was a lab leak. Somebody got sick in the lab, walked out, and bloop, and here we are. See? So, yeah, we would scratch our heads and go, oh, come on. This isn't, but God's hand is in this, and so there we are. Okay? Let's continue on, because maybe there might be some more stuff that Scripture tells us. Okay. That was verse 9. Okay, so thus God has taken away the livestock of your father and given them to me in the breeding season. So now we're going to continue with verse 10 through 12. In the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream. Did God not appear to in a dream to others? Yeah. So this is a divine visitation. It's not so. Yeah. Okay. So God's hand is in this more than just, oh yeah, God blessed me. Of course He did, but God visited him, and so now we know that Jacob knew that God's work was at hand. It didn't mean that he still didn't do all the stuff, right, that a breeder should do. Okay, but God was at work in and through all that, just like He's at work in and through the things that we do to what? Serve others in this world. Okay? So, in the breeding season of the flock, I lifted up my eyes and saw in a dream that the goats mated with the flock were striped, spotted, and mottled. Then the angel of God said to me in a dream, Jacob. I said, Here I am. He said, lift up your eyes and see. All the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. That's like when the slaves are crying out in Israel. I heard the cries of my people. Okay, so God says, oh, look. Okay, this is finally too much. Now remember, God promised Abraham that through a descendant of his, all the world will be blessed. That promise carried on through Isaac. It's carrying on through Jacob. But, when we go back to the very beginning of Genesis, we see God intervene in some very direct and in some extreme ways, right? To ensure that the promise continues and did not fail. The flood, right? These things where God ensures that the promise He first gave to Adam, that the promise He gave to Abraham, will continue as He promised. And so He's intervening in those places where, right, He's working through human history, but He's intervening at some specific points to make sure that the promised one will be born. Okay. Now this, we can't say this just from this verse, but this is when we hold Scripture back and we look at the grand narrative sweep. Okay? And so this is one of those times. Okay. It is now time for Jacob to leave. Remember, he will be part of God's chosen people. He needs to go back to the land. And then what? It needs to continue on. So his descendants, so on and so forth. So there we are. So God is working here in this specific way to ensure that Jacob is able to go home to the land that He promised Abraham. Okay? So, and then in verse 12, and He said, lift up your eyes and see, all the goats that mate with the flock are striped, spotted, and mottled, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. There we have it. Okay? So God's hand is in the thick of this. So even though all this weird stuff was going on, and we would go like, what? And all that stuff, well, it could be epigenetics, it could be genetics, well, it could be all those things, but the bottom line is God caused it to happen. Okay? And I don't see how that Jacob could have prospered that much, because this is not a dominant trait. Okay? So it would have taken a while, okay, to kind of breed. And then well, you think, okay, well, does that mean that all his flocks from now on are going to be this weird motley color? Well, we're going to find out that's not the case later on, but okay. So are we ready to continue? So yeah. So now this is not, yeah. So now we can all go like, yay. All right. Let's continue on verses 14 through 16. Okay. If I could find it. Okay. Yeah, it's verses, I said 30, but it's actually 31. Okay. Then Rachel and Leah answered and said to him, "Is there any portion or inheritance left to us in our father's house?" So right here, what are they saying? Yeah, in other words, when we married and whatever, I mean, Dad was supposed to kind of bequeath us with stuff too. I mean, that was the accepted norm, and they're going, that never happened. See? So now we learn after all this time that Laban not only swindled his brother, son-in-law, he's also swindled his daughters. Wow. How low can you get? Right? Man. So, okay. Are we not regarded by him as foreigners? For he sold us and has indeed devoured our money. Well, sold is, but yeah, didn't Jacob need to? Yeah. So it's kind of like, well, your dowry will be. But notice they don't say that. They say sold. So they're kind of miffed at Dad. Okay? Because he says, he's just treating us like property, not his daughters. So now after all this time, we realize, oh boy, yeah, there's dysfunction in that family and they're not happy. Okay. All the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Well, I don't know if all, right? But okay, hyperbolic, but still, that's what they feel. They've been swindled. They know Jacob's been swindled, and they're miffed. They're like, all these years, right? And we've been seeing, so they've been seeing how much Jacob has worked and how their father has reaped the benefits, not Jacob. And they both love Jacob. Jacob loves one way more than the other, right? And that caused a bunch of problems, but they both love Jacob. Okay? So the wealth that God has taken away from our father belongs to us and to our children. Now then, whatever God has said to you, do. So what are his wives encouraging to do? Rip off Dad. Take whatever you can, because he deserves that and more. Wow. What do you think Jacob's going to do? Well, what has he done so far? Now, this is not an exact comparison, but when one of his wives in the battle of the babies and et cetera, well, how about if you sleep with my servant in that way? It'll be as if I bore the child. So what does Jacob do? Sleeps with Rachel's servant. Well, then Leah's like, wait a minute. So now, well, I can't be outdone. So then she says, well, Jacob, you sleep with my servant. So that way, wow. So now Jacob is sleeping with his wives and their servants, right? Oh, what? Yeah, you can't make this stuff up. So he's listened to his wives. So now it's not the same thing, but chances are he'll listen to them. Okay? Did he not listen to his mom? Originally with Esau? Yeah, so that's kind of, we know that Jacob is probably kind of easygoing because look at all these years. You think eventually he would say, look, dude, I'm tired of you ripping me off. I'm taking what's my own, and you either kill me or I'm taking it. You think at some point that's he would be so miffed that's what would happen. Like, oh, okay, right? Never. Okay? So, just based on what we know with Jacob, he'll probably do that. Now, he won't want to get caught. He'll do it sneakily, but he'll do it. And if I'm wrong, Scripture should tell us, right? So, okay, let's pretend that we've never heard the rest of the story because we want fresh ears and eyes. Okay? Oh, you know what I totally missed? Let's go back. Because with the whole the whole stick things, and let's go back because there's a whole bunch of wordplay going on here. And so we would kind of be chuckling, and it would kind of let us know that Laban's going to get his comeuppance just on the wordplay with the whole stick thing and the sheep colored in their coats. See, so this is on page 2 right in the middle. It says in Hebrew. So I'm going to connect all the dots for you so that way we could pretend we're Hebrew listeners and we get to chuckle. But we have to laugh like the ancient Jews did. But I don't know how they laughed. Yeah, of course they did. Okay, in Hebrew, Laban means white. Laban means white. Then Laban agrees to keep so when Laban agrees to keep the white sheep, he is keeping the sheep already labeled as Laban, Laban. So there's like, okay, I mean, that's the symmetry with the name right there. But there's more. This leaves the dark sheep for Jacob. The speckled goats, Nakod, sound similar to Jacob, Yaakov. See right? So we see this kind of word sounds that goes Laban, white, Jacob, Yaakov. Or Nakod, okay? So right there we can kind of see this wordplay going on with the name. So it wouldn't be strange, right? But later when Jacob takes fresh sticks of poplar, Libneh, okay, this becomes a wordplay on Laban's name, where Jacob will take branches of Libneh to outdo Laban. So there's this kind of, here you have the white insides, the Laban colored, right, of the poplar Libneh to outdo Laban. So there's all this stuff. And so at this point, this is merely just kind of prepping us for what will happen. But in Hebrew, we would catch it. It's like sometimes the humor in some of those Shakespeare plays, where there's kind of humor that's kind of thrown in there. And yet it's not necessary for the plot line. This is, the wordplay here isn't necessary, but it tells us, it preps us for what will happen later. Okay, so this is brilliant use of rhetoric, which is inspired. So we would be listening and we go, oh yeah, God's going to do something special. I just know it. And considering the weird thing with the sticks, who else would take something that weird and make it into something good? That's God. Okay? All right. Just wanted to go back there. So we're going to, we're on the bottom of page 3 now. Okay? So we're going to do a quick review of Laban's swindling ways. Okay? Laban deceived Jacob on his wedding night by swapping daughters. Right? Yeah. Laban forced Jacob to work 7 more years for the woman he wanted to marry. Okay? Laban cheated Jacob and changed his wages not once, not twice, not thrice, but 10 times. Okay? Sold his daughters, at least his daughters feel that way, to Jacob and devoured the money that would have been theirs. So he's been swindling Jacob and his daughters. There's enough anger to go around. Okay? Stole the sheep and goats that were agreed to be Jacob's. He said, well, I'll take the weird ones and I'll use those to start my flock. And he tries to prevent Jacob from thriving by doing that. And then he would have sent Jacob away empty-handed. We'll get to that later, if God didn't intervene. Wow. So Laban, we could honestly say, is a scoundrel. Okay? And so, yeah. So God did intervene to ensure the promise would continue. Now, everything is primed. Now he needs to go. God said so. His wives are angry, and his wives say, steal from dad whatever he owes us. It's going to get crazier. Okay, let's look at verse 17. We'll go through 21. And if we run out of time, we run out of time, okay? So Jacob arose and set his sons and his wives on camels. He drove away all his livestock, all his property that he had gained, the livestock in his possession that he had acquired in Padam Aram, to go to the land of Canaan to his father Isaac. Well, okay, so far nothing's weird. Laban might not be happy, but it doesn't sound like he's stealing anything. Okay? Laban had gone to shear his sheep, And Rachel stole her father's household gods. Okay, now things are getting weird. These are called teraphim. Okay, and so these were kind of, they were small representations of deities that people would pray to or worship. And so you go, well, why did she take them? Is she a believer in the God she grew up with and doesn't believe in Yahweh? Or is she trying to have it both ways? Or is she simply mad at Dad? I'll take these and I'll show you, Dad. I'm thinking it's probably all of them. You know, sometimes it's hard to kind of give up. So she knows Yahweh is real. She believes in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And yet she grew up with these gods. Okay? And so there's probably still a place in her heart for them. But she's also very miffed at her dad, and this we know. So this is probably like, oh man, this is like a win-win situation to her, right? Getting a 2-for-1. Okay, the text doesn't tell us, but we know in chapter 35, she'll have to get rid of them. So it makes me think that there's more to it than being simply mad at Dad. But the immediate context is she's mad at Dad and she wants to get back at him. And this is one way to do that. So we can't discount that. And I think that's significant in why she does this. Okay, but she does this. Does Jacob know? Okay, so, okay. So wherever we were, okay, so that was verse 19. So, and Jacob tricked Laban the Aramean by not telling him that he intended to flee. So he leaves, but he leaves and doesn't let Laban know. Well, I don't think that's so odd. Because every time he's done it before, Laban has found a way to swindle him. And it could be that Jacob is thinking, I need to leave. And if I talk to Laban, he's going to swindle me one more time and I'll probably fall for it. Right? And so I'm not even going to do that. Because I know myself, and if I'm honest, he'll swindle me. Okay? So he probably realizes he's a bit of a sucker. Okay? He fled with all he had and arose and crossed the Euphrates and set his face toward the hill country of Gilead. So he's heading toward home. Yay! Okay? Well, let's continue. When it was told Laban on the 3rd day that Jacob had fled, he took his kinsman with him and pursued him for 7 days and followed close after him into the hill country of Gilead. But God came to Laban the Aramean in a dream by night and said to him, be careful not to say anything to Jacob, either good or bad. That's not what the Hebrew says. Oh, yeah, it says good and bad, but it's really, don't say anything from good to bad. In other words, how has Laban been operating so far? He'll talk to Jacob and say, oh, do I have a deal for you? And it ends up being bad for Jacob. So God comes to him and says, look, don't say something where you're going to promise him good and it's going to swindle him and turn out to be bad. So God is putting a brake on this so Jacob could go home. So God understands Jacob and he understands Laban, and he's not allowing that to happen. And so he personally intercedes to ensure. So not either good or bad, but from good to bad. That's what's happening. There's a little bit of a difference there, isn't there? Yeah. So if you're like, what am I supposed to say if it's not good or bad? Don't do anything or don't be a bad used car salesman to Laban. Okay? So, okay. Are we good so far? All right. I lose my space and then I go, I have to find it now. Okay, so let's continue with 25, okay? Oh, that's 29. Okay, so 30. And now you have gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house. Okay, but why? Oh, okay, so God comes to him in a dream. I skipped a few verses. Okay, and so Laban now catches up with him, and now he's accosting Jacob. Okay, and so we should go back a few because I saw that snippet and I thought, you're right. So Laban overtakes Jacob. This is verse 25. Now Jacob had pitched his tent in the hill country, and Laban with his kinsmen pitched his tent in the hill country of Gilead. And Laban said to Jacob, "What have you done that you have tricked me and driven away my daughters like captives of the sword?" Really? Oh, they were really happy to leave because Dad's been swindling them. "Why did you flee secretly and trick me and did not tell me, so that I might have sent you away with mirth and songs, with tambourine and lyre?" He's not doing good to bad. He's just doing bad. He's lying. Do you think he really would have done that? No. Okay, but this is what he's saying, right? "And why did you not permit me to kiss my sons and my daughters farewell? Now you have done foolishly. It is in my power to do you harm. But the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, 'Be careful not to do anything to Jacob, either good or bad.'" From good to bad. "And now you have gone away because you longed greatly for your father's house. But why did you steal my gods?" Jacob answered and said to Laban, "Because I was afraid, for I thought that you would take your daughters from me by force." Which question is he answering? "Anyone with whom you find your gods shall not live." So he's at that when he says, earlier he was not answering about the stolen teraphim, the stolen gods. He was answering why he left. Now he's answering about the stolen gods, right? The little figurines. "Anyone with whom you find your God shall not live." He obviously didn't know that Rachel had stolen them, because Rachel is his favored wife. He would not put her life on the line, right? So he's blissfully ignorant. So Jacob took everything that was owed, but he did not steal from Laban. Okay? But Rachel did. "Anyone with whom you find your God shall not live. In the presence of our kinsmen, point out what I have that is yours and take it." Jacob is still too nice. Because what if Laban goes, "Well," right? But God did come to him in a dream, so he's probably doesn't want to get too out of line. Now Jacob did not know that Rachel had stolen them. Well, yeah, even if that wasn't said, it would be obvious, right? Well, let's continue on. "So Laban went into Jacob's tent and Leah's tent and tent of the two female servants, but he did not find them. And he went out of Leah's tent and entered Rachel's. Now Rachel had taken the household gods and put them in the camel's saddle and sat on them. Laban felt all about the tent, but did not find them. And she said to her father, 'Let not my lord be angry that I cannot rise before you, for the way of the woman is upon me.'" What is she saying? Yes. Okay. So what is dad supposed to do? Supposed to defer, right? Yeah. So she's hiding the teraphim with her, and then she's saying, "Oh, I'm having my period, so Dad, sorry." So he's not going to search where the teraphim are hidden, which he's sitting on, right? So he searched but did not find the household gods. It's kind of funny in a way. So her own daughter, right? I mean, what do you expect? His own daughter. I mean, he learned from the best. She learned from the best. So there we have it. Okay. Let's continue on a little bit more. We'll see. Because we want to finish the chapter if we can. If not, next week will be fine. Then Jacob became angry and berated Laban. Jacob said to Laban, What is my offense? What is my sin that you have hotly pursued me? For have you felt through all my goods? What have you found of all your household goods? Set it here before my kinsmen and your kinsmen, that they may decide between us two. Put up or shut up. Okay, so Jacob is angry, and he's probably a little more forthright than he normally is. Okay? But he has it in him. These 20 years I have been with you, your ewes and your female goats have not miscarried, and I have not eaten the rams of your flock. What was torn by wild beasts I did not bring to you. I bore the loss of it myself. From my hand you required it, whether stolen by day or stolen by night. So, if anything happens, if there's any loss, that's on you. Oh, wow. Well, thanks, father-in-law. Right? We're not going to share it equally? Okay. There I was by the By day the heat consumed me, and the cold of night, and my sheep fled from my eyes. These 20 years I have been in your house. I served you 14 years for your 2 daughters, and 6 years for your flock, and you have changed my wages 10 times. If the God of my father, the God of Abraham, and the fear of Isaac had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. The fear. There's a double entendre going on here, right? He's referring to God, but why is he referring to God as fear? He's a God you need to fear as well. Implication. Okay? So, and Laban's a swindler. Laban would not miss that. Now, he might try to weasel around it, but he would not miss that. Okay? Because that's why he's such a good swindler. He's aware of the lay of the land. He sees everything that's going on, and he figures out a way to kind of navigate so that way, right? Yeah. So, not good. Okay? Had not been on my side, surely now you would have sent me away empty-handed. God saw my affliction and the labor of my hands and rebuked you last night. Okay, let's stop here because it's a quarter after. We'll finish up next week, but we know this. Jacob will not be, shall we say, he will not be led astray. He will not be stopped from going back home. Okay? And so we see kind of a bold Jacob confronting him. Okay? And even saying, you better fear God too, because it's not just that you swindled me. Right? So implication, all this stuff. And so we'll see what happens. But even for a swindler, this should have its effect. But that's next week. Okay? Thoughts? Questions? I knew it was covering a lot of territory today that we maybe wouldn't cover it all. But, I wanted Genesis. I wanted to do Genesis in, I don't know, less than 30 lessons. Let's close with prayer, shall we? Oh, Heavenly Father, let us not be as the Pharisees when we read the accounts of your saints. Yes, your saints of old. Oh, they were so messed up. But so are we. You love them, and you love us. And you went out of your way to ensure that the promise remained true, that salvation would be theirs and ours. Thank you for such involvement in their lives and in our lives. As you came to Jacob, come to us as you promise now, which is in word and sacrament, that we may receive you through your Son with the life and forgiveness he gives us. Bless us as we make our way into the service to be present among you and your holy things. In our Savior's name we pray. Amen.